Welcome back to Through Your Hill. I am so thrilled to have you back at my channel today because we are going to be doing a part 2 of the Homemaker's Guide to Music series. The last video I shared with you was the essential jazz albums that a homemaker might want to consider having in her musical cabinet. And today we're going to be talking about classical music that you might want to have as a homemaker. And again, I have with me my dear husband who has taught me most everything I know as it relates to music. And he's going to be discussing with us what are some of the most essential classical albums to have on hand as a homemaker. Thank you for being here again, my love. Would you mind sharing with our viewers today what are some of the best classical albums that you would recommend for the homemaker?
Sure. Well, first I'd like to say that we're probably going to focus primarily on the Baroque and classical period. There is some later periods known as the Romantic period that follows the classical period. The reason why I stress that is because the music started changing. The more technology changed and the more the world changed, the music was influenced by that. But what I can say on the onset is that in the Baroque music, you'll hear a lot of emphasis on very light, stringy instruments. The piano had not been created yet, so the concert piano as we know it today. So you'll hear a lot of harpsichords, things of that nature. You hear the great emphasis on strings, sometimes early guitars, things of that nature, and then vocals. I'm shying away primarily from vocal work on this recommendation. So the majority of these selections will be in that Baroque and classical.
So before you dive into your recommendations, there are times when I really want to listen to jazz. The mood that I want to set in the house is jazz worthy. And then there are other times where classical really fits the mood. And I wanted to ask you about some of these albums that you'll be sharing with us today. What kind of mood do they promote in the home? Are they for dinner parties? Are they for just doing your average homemaking tasks? Or could they be for every day? Are they livable pieces? I'd love to know in your mind, what sort of atmosphere are we creating with these albums?
The majority of these albums, I took that in mind. It's functional music. You can put it on and not be completely distracted or hit over the head. However, there might be something towards the end, specifically like the Chopin pieces. It can be dramatic and kind of heavier sounding than some of the other ones, but for the most part, the music is approachable and will not completely just derail the atmosphere. There's nothing wrong with that, it's wonderful, but I was trying to avoid that type of sound for this particular recommendation.
Perfect, so the music is approachable, is what you're trying to say.
Yes, it is.
For the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Well, let's get started on the list, and these are not in any particular order.
Yeah.
So Johann Sebastian Bach did cello suites. Suites are dances, and essentially, this is not dance music, but it's essentially composed in the style of dance. So there are movements that are like jig or like saraband, and these are all referencing to dance forms in Italian. For this one, it's just suites number 1 and 2. This is very famous work. Everybody has done these recordings, but I particularly like the Yo-Yo Ma 1983 recordings of these.
It's so good.
These are great, and he's recorded these many times, but the originals from 1983 on CBS, Columbia, now Sony, those are recommended. Sticking with Johann Sebastian Bach, this is a newer recording, but this is one of my favorite piano players, Murray Pariah. These are the French suites recorded by Murray Pariah. This is a recording from 2016. We actually got to see Murray Pariah at Northridge University back in the day, and he actually opened up with French Suite number 4, so that's really special.
That was a great night. That was a concert I will not soon forget.
Yeah, that was
a
beautiful.
Great time.
That was wonderful.
He's a fantastic artist to see in person.
And continuing on to talk about the early classical period, we're going to talk about Haydn's cello concertos. These are wonderful pieces of music, so beautiful, so melodic, so airy. Cello concerto number 1 and number 2 are very famous. They're kind of one of those pieces of music that you've heard before, and then when you play it, you're like, oh, that's where that's from. So really, really popular, beautiful music.
And honestly, anything that says Academy of St. Martin in the Fields has got to be good.
Yes.
I don't know if that's where it was recorded or if
that's the orchestra that is playing with the soloist.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with this one, but I believe you.
You are. If I put this on,
okay, I would know it.
You would know
okay.
it, yeah.
See, a lot of these titles, I know Yo-Yo Ma, I know Murray Pariah, but when I see the albums on some of these, I don't recognize them, but he's right. If I were to hear them, they would be familiar to me. And that's kind of what we were touching on the last time we spoke. The more you play these albums and these artists in your home, they will become household. Your family will remember them, and it will really bless them throughout the years. And it will probably bring you back to a certain time in your home life to invoke memories.
Absolutely. So sticking with Haydn, we're going to focus on his trumpet concertos. This is a recording from the 1980s with a very young Wynton Marsalis. Haydn just has this wonderful ability to create music that has a lot of light. This is like really happy music. You have a huge affinity for horn concertos.
Horns.
Yeah, you do.
I love it. It reminds me of England, actually,
Yeah.
the horns. The two pieces that you just shared about Haydn, are those more upbeat? Those are happier, whereas like certain Bach pieces are kind of more mellow, or they're good for sleep.
Mm-hmm. Or they can be very dramatic.
Very dramatic, yeah.
No, those are, Haydn.
Those two are very happy and
very
fluffy
happy.
And floaty kind of.
Yes, very much so.
Okay.
Yes, and this music is too, and this is another composer from the Baroque era, Vivaldi. This is Concerto D minor, Concerto C major. These are just wonderful. This is a great record. This is conducted by Leonard Bernstein. This is from the 1950s. This music is beautiful. It sounds wonderful. Any of the violin concertos that Vivaldi did, another very light, very beautiful, not without its heaviness at times, but for the most part, wonderful music. Baroque music is just fantastic to listen to. Great atmosphere.
Really full music. Would you call Baroque music really full and colorful?
Airy, ornate.
Ornate.
Just beautiful.
That's a good word.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then going back to one of the biggest names in classical music as far as composers, not that Bach and Vivaldi are not huge because they are, but Mozart. This is Symphony number 41 and 39. These are some of the last symphonies he ever wrote. They do have their shadows at times and their bigger sounds, but with Mozart, again, it's just everything he did, he really was a perfectionist, and all the layers and the way the instruments are arranged and organized and how they communicate. I mean, it's just worthy music to listen to. Even though if you're not a huge fan of symphonies, Mozart and I would say Haydn, symphony works are never going to be very bombastic like what you would experience later on with some of the late Romantic periods.
Okay, good to know.
And then going to another massive name in music, Beethoven. I love his piano concertos. Again, Murray Pariah, this is a recording from the 1980s, but you got Piano Concerto number 3 and number 4. I love all of the Beethoven concertos, but number 3 really has a very danceable and just joyous sound to it. It's wonderful. These are great recordings. And even though there's an orchestra in here, when you hear the word concerto, it's usually meaning that there's going to be a solo instrument highlighted, and then the symphony comes in behind it or underneath it or above it. So another Murray Pariah recording. Clearly there's a theme here, but the...
we really like him.
Yes, we do. Mendelssohn wrote 2 piano concertos. He's actually responsible for reviving creating a huge revival for the music of Bach, and really brings it back on the mainstream by doing performances in his day, and it just explodes, and Bach has been forever popular since. So I just find that history amazing there.
So when was the timeline of Mendelssohn? Would you say like
these piano
1800s or?
These piano concertos are from 1831. Yeah, very much mid-Romantic period. These are great piano concertos, really beautifully orchestrated. Again, you will see some shadows in these sounds, but for the most part, very worthwhile and not something that's going to just completely just take over the listening experience as far as just some of the really heavy stuff, like if you were listening to Mahler or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you talk about Chopin and you talk about music that can be incredibly heavy, I mean, a lot of shadows in this. The man was tormented in a lot of ways, died pretty young. But when it comes to like poetic perfection, every single note in Chopin's nocturnes are like a poem. Every single line matters, and how it's played matters. And this music is incredibly dramatic, incredibly sentimental and beautiful, but it still has its edginess. It still has its darkness and shadows, if you will. But the nocturnes can be things that, nocturning meaning like nighttime. So it could be more of like a nighttime experience, not necessarily the morning time. Your dad loves these recordings. He really, he really loves them a lot. So you can't go wrong with that.
I want to set the stage, and I want to see if you agree. Would this be an album that a homemaker might put on when she has fed the family dinner, she's cleaned up the kitchen, and she's softened the lighting? Is this the album that might be good?
Definitely. I wouldn't put this on when you're making eggs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Note to self.
You might cry in the eggs.
Don't put them on when you're making eggs. The nocturnes are only for nighttime.
And then going to another massive name would be Brahms, but very much Brahms was looked at as like the next Beethoven because he was just a genius. And he was a traditionalist. Other people in his time that were contemporaries of him were making a lot edgier music, but he was really kind of keeping that tradition from Mozart and Beethoven alive. I love his clarinet string quartet. So you have the clarinet as the one reed instrument on here, and then the string quartet is working alongside it. Beautiful, beautiful recordings. This is just a great recording. Brahms doing the clarinet quartet. Just a wonderful, wonderful recording.
Whenever I hear the name Brahms, I think of the show Fawlty Towers. I'm not sure if any of you have ever seen the show Fawlty Towers. It has John Cleese, the main character, Basil Fawlty. He's listening to Brahms, and his wife comes in and says something like, "Basil, what's that racket?" Or "Turn down that racket." And he says, "That's Brahms! Brahms' third racket!"
That's right. It's a great line. It's just
so that's stuck in my mind always since then.
And the pun is, who would call Brahms music racket?
Who would call Brahms racket?
Yeah, that's what's funny.
But his wife Sybil is quite the beast in some ways. Her character is quite beastly, so of course she would call Brahms racket.
And then a bonus album. This is definitely something that would be festive. This would be played around Christmas time. The King's College Choir.
So good.
They do a lot of music and recordings, so it's really hard to know what to choose from them, but you can actually find this album on CD or on iTunes. I really love this one. This is from the 1980s. It's orchestrated beautifully. The songs are wonderful. It opens up with Once in Royal David City, which we all love. It's got
that's my favorite.
It's got Wonder the First Noel, Hark the Herald, Away in a Manger. Just wonderful Christmas albums. So I do love putting this album on, and once Thanksgiving is over, this starts getting spun in the house.
I do want to say with this album, and he's right, this is like our family soundtrack during the holiday season. Their rendition of Once in David's Royal City makes me cry almost every time I hear it. It is so beautiful. They hold back so much in the beginning, and there's this tension. I can't recommend that song highly enough, even if it's not Christmas. I mean, just listen to it and be touched.
Indeed. Well, yeah, thanks for letting me share these recommendations. There is so much to what you would call classical music. There are so many things I left out. There's amazing works that are definitely need to be celebrated and listened to, but that would probably have to be for a different time, a different episode.
This is just the starter flight, okay? This is just our way of sharing with the homemaker who maybe doesn't have a curated music cabinet and wants to know where to start with jazz and classical. This is just the start point. So there are many more to come, I'm sure. And we have with us here a great mind when it comes to music and music history. And so thank you so much for helping us today, my love.
You're very welcome.
To understand more about how we can build up our cabinets. Thankfully, mine is already built up because he's been curating it for years. But that's it. That's all we have for you today, friends. Thank you so much for joining me on today's video. And I look forward very much to seeing you in the next one. Goodbye for now.